So I've basically been playing in the digital marketing space for a long time. I think just a little over 20 years. And I've been pretty fortunate in being able to work on some very interesting things. So I've worked on everything from hologram technology to small businesses, working with the hospitality industry, working in professional sports, and also within just small businesses in general. Um, so the one good thing, I guess, and I guess the best thing that kind of came out of all the work that I've done is I've really been able to sort of see many different industries and really understand how content marketing and how marketing in general plays into basically really building awareness for your business and being strategic about it and kind of being genuine about it really can help drive really good audiences to whatever you're trying to basically promote or push forward. And what I wanted to share with you was just a basic quick strategy on sort of how I approach these things. And this is sort of strategy sort of works for anyone that's basically, independent or just a small business to like a larger corporation. It's sort of like an overview of how you kind of see everything. So you should generally be able to apply what I'm going to say probably to most applications to what you guys are genuinely working on your own. So the way we position our agency is to be really bold and to kind of be a little bit out of our comfort zone. And that's sort of what led us into basically being able to play in a lot of these spaces where they really wanted innovation. So working with the holograms and working with sports teams and the hospitality industry and all those kind of things, you really kind of need to stand out a little bit. And that's what we've been able to be really successful at. So moving onto that, like what we kind of say sets us apart and what we've generally been able to do is sort of be able to create demand and also have like measurable outcomes with it, meaning that whatever we try to do and any goals that we set for trying to market, we always make sure that you can track them through metrics and things like that. And that's very possible, especially in the digital space, because you can basically tie analytics to everything that you're doing. And that's a key component to basically doing any form of marketing is to be able to track what your actual results are. Traditionally, like I guess the older way of marketing when you're not looking at things online, it was really hard to do that. So you didn't really know what you're spending money on or your time and effort on. And as a small business, like the time and money component is very important. So being able to kind of track and measure what you're actually getting out of everything that you're doing is a really key component in it. And I encourage anyone that's going to kind of build any sort of marketing strategy to like look at your metrics as sort of the central part of anything that you're doing. If you can't measure it, then there's really not much reason to put any sort of energy into kind of making it all happen for yourself because it's not really you're not going to know what's going to happen out of it. So skipping through that. So I'll kind of jump right into the content marketing side of things. So content marketing essentially, if you compare it to traditional marketing, is really a focus on sort of sharing your expertise or your subject matter to target audiences that you want to kind of speak with, essentially. So it's really about like trying to drive customers to kind of take action based on them sort of understanding that you really know your marketplace or your subject matter, whatever you're basically trying to promote as a business. Whereas sort of like the traditional way of doing things is sort of evergreen, where you put out a bunch of ads and commercials and direct mails and things like that that may or may not hit your target. It's like kind of casting a very wide net. Whereas with content marketing, you're trying to be very like targeted. So you really want to understand the kind of niche that you're going to speak to and really want to kind of understand the audiences that you're kind of going after. Then being very specific is really good, actually. So you really want to sort of like, if you can identify, say, even 100 people that truly are looking for a specific, I guess, service that you may be offering, as opposed to trying to target like 10,000 people that may or may not be looking for that service, you're probably going to have better results with those 100 people. And that's where content really plays a big key in it, because that really helps kind of show that you know what you're talking about and you know what your expertise is, and people that are really looking for that information are going to resonate with that and probably more likely like look towards you to kind of do business, basically. So that's where I think it's one of the best ways as a small business to really kind of like excel and propel yourself, because it's probably the best use of your resources. And usually if you're marketing as a small business, you technically don't have a ton of money and resources to kind of put to this kind of stuff, right? So whatever you can do, put it into the right sort of audiences and the right kind of place through basically building yourself as a bit of an expertise, as an expert in that space, essentially. So these are sort of the main reasons. We kind of just went over it now, but why it kind of matters is that it'll definitely help you build more revenue if you're targeting the right audience. There's a good chance that you're going to increase your market share just from basically making yourself stand out as a bit of a thought leader. And you'll definitely be able to generate many more leads, especially if you're targeting the right niches that you really want to understand. So big component is spending a lot of time to really understand who you're trying to talk to and what you're trying to say to them. Those are really key components in all of this. And if you spend a lot of time doing the research on trying to understand all that, you'll get much further with all of this rather than sort of like just trying to write on anything that you think may or may not work. It's really good to try to really understand what sort of the pain points are that people are potentially looking to solve, or what are people asking in the marketplace in general that you think you can help solve them. And then you want to basically try to position yourself as a bit of a thought leader within that space, essentially. And it's definitely a lot cheaper to do all this when you have a bit of a system going than trying to do outbound marketing. In the real estate industry, for example, you probably realize like trying to send a ton of door knockers or direct mail and things like that is really expensive. Whereas you can position yourself on Instagram as sort of a real estate expert within a certain niche, or like a certain sort of audience, for example, that may be comfortable working with you and things like that. So that's sort of the difference. And then the I guess the main benefits that you kind of get out of this again is the trust and authority is a big key component. So that's where you're positioning yourself as a bit of an expert or a thought leader within like what you're trying to basically push yourself forward with. So whatever your industry is, you can't really cover all of it, right? So don't try to be an expert in everything, but just pick the core things that you think you can kind of excel the most at and really focus in on those and try to build your audiences like slowly one by one rather than try to just hit everything under the sun. You're not going to get far with trying to do everything, basically. It's just unless you got a massive team, it's probably not going to happen. Another really important thing that kind of comes out of content marketing is that you organically build a lot of traffic and like search visibility for your website, for your social media, for anything that you're putting online, basically. So a core component in any sort of content marketing strategy is actually a pretty solid website with like a blog component to it, with some other sort of components that allow you to kind of create more and more real estate by publishing regular blog content and those kind of things that will help you kind of just naturally hit like people that are searching for these sort of questions, for example, right? Um, and then with that obviously comes more leads, more engagement. Engagement is basically sort of a measurement of how people are interacting with your content and how sort of like I guess valuable they find it. So if your engagement is high, which typically you may see in social media through like likes and like follower growth, or in your website through like increased like search traffic or just audiences coming to your website, that's all telling you that people are actually paying attention to what you're doing. And it's a way to kind of like adjust if, for example, you're not getting the right kind of engagement, right? So on the flip side of it, if you're finding that um your engagement numbers are sort of flat, or you're not sort of seeing some sort of like slow like rise, then maybe you need to switch your strategy. And that's where the metrics kind of make a really big sort of factor in all of this. And the cost effectiveness we've talked about a couple of times already, but like it really is a way to kind of drive a measurable sort of like results without putting tons and tons of money into what you're actually trying to do. So you're not really needing to rely on like, paying for advertising. You're not needing to rely to pay for like lots of sort of like outbound marketing initiatives and things like that. And those things can be really expensive, like trying to advertise, especially in very competitive markets. And like things like, trying to do within like the business world, real estate again, some of these other places, like it's really expensive to run like an ad. Whereas if you were to probably spend the same amount of time writing a series of blog articles that kind of talked about the same things, you're probably going to slowly start seeing some traffic from those kind of things as well. So no, you can ask questions anytime you'd like. Yeah, sure.
Generate and nurture. So
yeah.
Generation, I'm coming from consultancy background. So generation is no issue.
Mm-hmm.
If I talk about AI,
yeah,
people would come all over the place. So
yeah.
we might get 150 leads
yeah.
on a virtual webinar,
yeah.
which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is the conversion part, which is nurture part.
Yeah.
So I want to understand, maybe you are coming from like experience, how would we convert those leads into the second round? That if we have 150 eyeballs,
mm-hmm.
how can we again come get them onto a call? Because when we try to get them, engage them in a call,
yeah,
maybe only 1 or 2% of them come out of it.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot.
Yeah.
So what is like a effective method?
So I guess one way to look at it is that you need to sort of map your customer's journey and sort of build a strategic sort of map to figure out all the different touch points where you can kind of communicate with them, right? So they came to your webinar, which is already good because you know that that's a warm lead. They're not just coming off the market. They came because they're interested in something. So following the webinar, you likely have like their email or some way to get in touch with them. And that's an opportunity to send them more information that will slowly kind of build them further down into like a warmer lead. And to do that, you just need to understand what sort of touch points you can kind of hit. So if your webinar is on a certain topic, maybe right after that, maybe like a day or so after, or right even immediately after that, there's like a thank you note that goes out with a little bit more information that was like that adds a little bit more to what you shared in the webinar. Chances are in your webinar, it's probably high level stuff that you're sharing. So maybe you add like a targeted article that dives deeper into the concept that you're kind of going into. And then maybe a few days later, you kind of get back to them with another email that gives them more information. But the idea is to kind of keep building a bit of a relationship and trying to push them further down a journey. So like if you're really trying to get them to a specific topic, like you really kind of funnel into that. And that's sort of the way to do it. So with automations and things like that, you can kind of put this all together and not have to worry about having to do it every day, basically. So you can set this all up essentially and kind of have it ready to go from there. Does that kind of make sense? No problem. Excuse me. So the key components to any sort of content marketing strategy, they're pretty straightforward, but you definitely want to have some sort of blog component, which is where it's mostly driven by writing content for your website. And it doesn't need to be long articles. And especially now with like AI and like ChatGPT and all these kind of tools, you can really leverage a lot of that stuff to help you write a lot of content really quickly. And you can also sort of recycle some of that content for other markets. So say if you started writing a blog, you can then take pieces of that blog and probably come up with some social media posts that follow up to that. And then you could take your social media posts and your blog content and put that together into like an email newsletter that potentially goes out like every month. And you can even take that further by potentially taking some of like your social content or your blog content and making like little videos out of them and things like that, or of you just talking about like some of these topics that you've already written about, or you're already posting about, or you're already sharing through your newsletter. So the whole idea is to kind of work in a bit of like an ecosystem. Like you create these tools and you kind of create these channels where you're going to start posting your content. And then you build a bit of a strategy on what sort of content you want to kind of publish. And then you just start kind of going about it. So like, start writing some blog posts and then start trying to figure out how to get those blog posts onto as social media posts and kind of keep going from there. How's it going? And as we kind of move forward, I'll show you a bit of a strategy on how to kind of put that all together. But on a high level, this is sort of what you're looking at in terms of like the key elements that you need to really run a solid content marketing strategy. Blogging, social media, and email are probably the top. Video is known to convert the best. So if you can get comfortable with, recording yourself on video, giving insights, giving like, any sort of expertise that you have, and just sharing that generally with the public, you're going to have a lot of people sort of paying attention to you. And another big part in this is consistency. So once you start, you can't stop. Like, you need to kind of keep going. It's a bit of a slow run. So you're not going to start seeing results like in the first month or 2 months. Like, but as you kind of keep doing this, you're going to start seeing that there's an audience that's slowly building, and you'll start seeing like your numbers slowly climb. So that's sort of where I was getting at with that. So the consistency sort of builds like that trust element. And that's really what, as a small business, like, you can really rely on that to kind of get the right sort of customers. Because if you can get people to trust what you're doing, then they're likely going to want to work with you. And to me, that's sort of been a key component in everything that I've sort of done, is in most cases, like, I kind of work with people based on the fact that they sort of trust my expertise more than the fact that me trying to sell them on why they need to do these things. And most of that is generally through like me putting out content and sort of like trying to give advice and those kind of things. So trust is a really big component in all of this, and consistency is what's going to sort of show people that they can sort of trust you and that you know what you're doing. And then the relevant part is also very important. We touched on it before, where you don't want to kind of do everything. Pick the things that you're good at, or pick the things that are most important to your growth, and focus on trying to push as much information about that as you can, rather than like, trying to just do it on everything. Don't confuse or like sort of um like muddy your message by trying to do too much. It's better to do less, but do more of less, essentially. So this is how it all works to your initial sort of question. So this approach is sort of known as the marketing flywheel. And the whole idea is that you're always sort of working in a circular motion to try to really get people engaged and nurture them through sort of your whole funnel. And traditionally, marketing was kind of looked at as sort of a funnel. So you'd start with like, putting a big catch-all, and then slowly trying to drive people further down into your funnel to finally get them to a point where they take action, or maybe like, potentially like make a purchase or something of that sort. So this is a similar model, but it just works in a circular way rather than trying to get people to go linear. And the way to think about that is essentially the same. So I'll compare it to a funnel because traditionally that's what people generally understand. But during the attraction phase, it's sort of your high level. So this is where you're putting out stuff on social media, you're putting things out on your blog, on your videos, general channels that you have for sort of pushing out content. And with the intention that you're building awareness about yourself and about your services or about your products, and you're getting people interested in what you're doing, essentially. So once they're sort of interested, the idea is that you want to engage them. And this is where the nurturing part comes, right? So if you were to say put a webinar out, you're kind of in the attraction phase at that point. But once they've signed up for your webinar, you're almost getting into like your engagement phase. So you're like somewhere in between here now. So they, for example, take your webinar, and they're happy with the outcome of that. These are your opportunities to potentially engage them with more content, with like FAQs or like polls and quizzes and all these different things that you can kind of do to get people to kind of like talk back to you. Essentially, that's your intention. So you've initially sort of in attract given them information. Now in engage, you're trying to get them to like have a conversation with you, essentially. And at that point, you're starting to convert them into customers. So people that are having a conversation with you are likely now going to probably be interested in doing some kind of business with you. That's typically how it would go, right? So at that point, you're trying to close them into like becoming customers, and you're getting to the point where you're trying to like delight them with like more personalized information. So at this point, now that you've had a conversation with them, you've likely understood what their challenges or what they're needing, essentially, right? Like whatever problems they're trying to solve, or whatever reason they have for wanting to engage someone in your expertise. And at that point, you want to try to get personal. So you want to tailor as much information to them, specifically to their needs and things like that. And that could be like special offers. It could be a very targeted proposal. It could be many different things, but this is your opportunity to essentially really like kind of like personalize that experience and make it about your customer and turn them into like someone that's going to be like a long-standing customer, with the idea that if you do something successfully with them, that they'll get to a point where they'll eventually become your promoter, and at that point they're almost working for you. So this is where like a referral or like a good review or testimonial kind of comes out of it. And then that sort of feeds back into the attraction phase, because then you have more content, you have more reason to kind of show that you can build greater awareness. So take like a Google review as an example, right? So you did a good job with the customer and you asked them to give you a review and they gave you a 5-star review on Google. Now that's going to help get you more people that are potentially out there searching for someone that's there for you, right? So that's this whole idea of kind of working in a circle and sort of essentially constantly thinking about your customer at every aspect, but also thinking about how content can essentially help sort of drive and sort of like speed this whole wheel up. So if you can keep the momentum going, the more and more you do, the more it's going to kind of keep building. Sorry, something strange happened. No worries. So yeah, so that's essentially the idea. And one other important aspect in this is this concept of friction. So that's like pain points essentially. Like this journey is not going to be perfect. The way I'm describing it, this is like an ideal situation, everything works fine, but that's generally not going to be the case. You may get someone that isn't happy with your service, or you may get someone that's not the right customer for you. So those things could potentially slow things down, or make things a little bit more of a challenge, and you want to try to just get ahead of those things. So like there's a good chance that you can't kind of stop or avoid every one of those scenarios, but as much as you can, you want to try to identify where your pain points are and reduce the friction so your wheel can kind of keep spinning, if you think of it as sort of an analogy in that sense. So overall, this is sort of your content marketing ecosystem. This is probably the like understanding this whole idea is probably the single most important like concept and strategy behind content marketing essentially. And if you do want to get some more information on this, like HubSpot, which is a CRM platform, does a really good job of making you understand what like the marketing flywheel basically is. There's tons of content that's all free that you can basically go on their website and kind of really understand every aspect of this. They'll obviously trying to sell you on their services, but if you look at it from another perspective on how they've kind of created all that content, you really understand what you can do to kind of create a little bit of a niche in terms of explaining a really key like topic or key sort of strategy for helping drive people to your own business, but then also just it's a good place to get reference for how this all works essentially. So getting into kind of building out a marketing plan, which is sort of like your step one in terms of doing anything. um Go with the basics. So these are just some high level points, but basically this is sort of an outline that'll help you get to a point where you can have a content strategy. To build that, just build a plan, but the first thing is kind of understand your goals. So what are you trying to do? And that could be like, I want to grow my business to having 20% more customers next year, or whatever those are, but make them like measurable goals, make them like achievable, make them relevant, and make them time sensitive. um and that'll really help kind of like give you some like goalposts in terms of being able to understand like where you're trying to get to essentially. Other part is sort of understanding your audience. So really do the research to really understand your audience, who they are, what sort of demographics kind of play into how you can interact with them, what are like sort of their personas, and like what are their pain points in terms of what are the things that they're looking to solve, or what are the reasons why they would want to come and work with you. Those are all really key parts, but understanding your audience will really help you understand the kind of content that you can create to kind of build all this stuff. And as I mentioned, a lot of this can now be done with the help of like AI. So understanding these elements is how you can kind of help AI customize the content that you're creating. And that's why like, getting getting this all kind of drafted down in some sort of document will really help you all. Um, the other part is also sort of doing an initial sort of like audit of where you're at right now. So if you're starting a new business, then look at other people that are out there that are doing things that are similar to what you may want to get into, and potentially look at what they're doing and how could you do something different, or is there something that you can emulate and potentially like, you know, like use as inspiration for what you'd like to do. And if you already have a business, just look at yourself, look at like, you know, what are the things that I'm doing now that are helping? What are the things that potentially could be better? And what are the, like the opportunities that are out there that I haven't even like thought of yet that I could kind of get at? So those are all key components into kind of getting into this. The other part in this then is to get into the actual content strategy, right? So this strategy, now that you've understood your audience, you've understood sort of the opportunities that are out there, you understand your goals, you can now get to a point where you start planning, what am I going to start talking about to kind of like hit my goals, hit my audience, and also look at the opportunities that are out there. Start with keywords and start with like themes. So keywords are things that potentially relate to search engines. And there's a lot of keyword kind of analysis tools that you can kind of find online. SEM Rush, there's a few other ones. I have a list in the back of this deck that I'll show you guys after. That helps sort of like help you do a little bit of the research on to understand what people are searching for and what people potentially may be looking for related to whatever you may be offering as your service or product. And then understanding those keywords also helps you understand how and what type of content to create. Because if you just sit there and try to like think of, you know, like let me try to come up with 10 blog posts, it's not going to work. But if you know the keywords that people are looking for, then you can kind of plan the topics around that essentially. The other part is establish a calendar. So like really make a schedule so you can manage all of this basically. Because it's not easy and straightforward to kind of like do this on a daily basis, for example, and content needs to be put out on a regular basis. So um it's actually relevant. If you're only putting out a little bit at a time and then for a few weeks you put out nothing, it's not going to do anything for you. You need to be regular with it. And the best way to do that is just think ahead. So in my world, I almost think like 3 months at a time, basically, and make a whole calendar for that quarter. It'll take me a full day to maybe sit there and plan that all out. But once I've planned that and I've written out all the content, it's probably in total about a week's worth of work to put all that together. And then I'm good for 3 months. I can plan it, I can schedule it, I can do all that stuff. There's all these tools out there that'll help you do all that. Thank you. Excuse me. And I'll run you through some of those tools after. And then the channel strategy is sort of just understanding what you're going to put where, basically. So am I going to put this content that I created on social media, or am I going to put it on a blog, or if I'm going to put it somewhere else? Like just trying to plan that as part of your calendar will be a key component in all this, because it may make sense to write a blog post about something, but it may not make sense to put the same thing on social media. It may make sense to write something a little bit different, or, you know, complement whatever you've written on your blog post with social media. And just trying to like plan that and test it and sort of like, you know, trial it out a little bit is a bit of an art. But as you sort of like get into this whole methodology, it almost becomes natural, and you'll start kind of seeing that it'll make sense to you more and more, especially if you can kind of see it all on a calendar, right? So if you can see it, the big picture, then you'll really be able to kind of strategically say like, this works better here and this works better there. So tailoring content to your platform is very important, basically. Don't try to constantly just use the same thing over and over again. Your messaging on LinkedIn is very different than say social like Instagram. So you know, those things don't always necessarily talk to each other the same way. They're not the same audiences, that kind of stuff. So be just conscious of all those things as you're kind of doing these things, basically. Last parts is basically the metrics. So set up your KPIs, which is basically key performance indicators. So this is just trying to say that you're going to track, like, say, your website traffic, or you're going to track how many like engagement, how much engagement you get on, say, Instagram through likes and through follows and things like that, how many lead generation increase you get through like your forms on your website, how much is being converted into like, say, a lead going into a customer, all these sort of things. These metrics can all basically be, the data for these metrics can actually be created, like taken from mostly from Google Analytics, from the back end of all the social media channels, from your email marketing tools and things like that, that all exist. And just being able to look at that and then sort of understand like where you're heading is really key. And that's really how you measure your success and measure like your input and like how much you're putting in terms of your own energy or your budgets and things like that. If you've hired someone to do this, or if you potentially are putting in your own time, which is obviously worth money, you can put some sort of dollar value to all these metrics and really understand, am I like actually getting like my money's worth? Essentially, is the time that I'm putting in here, is it really making sense, or do I need to kind of start from scratch? Do I need to look at something differently? And that's where the analytics and the idea of always trying to improve constantly becomes a really important part. So don't just stick to one thing. The idea is that you can evolve and you can change, and you find different topics. You like trends could change. Like there's a lot of different things that can happen that should always make you always feel that you always need to be improving or refining things, essentially. I have a template that I'll share with you guys. I think like we can probably share the deck with everyone as well. But I have a template that you're more than welcome to sort of use that helps you kind of create a digital marketing strategy. So it's almost a fill in the blank sort of style, but um, it'll take you through all these main components and just sort of like give you a little bit of an explainer on how you can kind of create that section of the strategy and kind of put this together. But the digital marketing strategy is a key part, and basically sort of like sort of like being your recipe for all the activity that you're essentially doing. Um, so just implementing it, some of the things we've already kind of talked about, so I'll go through this quickly, but regular posting is key. So look at like scheduling tools like Hootsuite and Social Pilot, and there's a whole bunch of them out there that allow you to schedule content in advance. So you don't need to do this every day. If you try to do this like every day, it becomes your full-time job and you're going to get away from what you're actually meant to be doing. So realistically, if you plan ahead, you're probably only spending maybe a 1 day out of the week monitoring all this basically. And that's really all it should take. Um, and then again, the consistency part is key. So just make sure you're always kind of going about it. And this is the only way that you're going to see some sort of like improvement or growth in any of this. If you fall off, you fall off, but you're probably not going to see the same kind of growth. And then this is sort of some tools that you can kind of use in terms of like how you may want to approach kind of creating content. So for sort of researching and planning, there's a really good tool called SEM Rush, which will help you with like keywords and competitor analysis and looking at other people's websites. Google Trends is a really good place too, to just do simple searches on what's happening. So like, you can look at trends in Toronto within a certain industry, for example. And Trello is a very simple sort of like platform to organize your thoughts and your ideas. It works on your phone, it works on everything. It's basically like a giant like whiteboard with sticky notes, and it just allows you to like throw content in, so you can drag and drop like websites and imagery and things like that. So it's a good way to sort of like really just brainstorm essentially. When you're writing, Grammarly is probably my number one tool. It's a AI powered spell checker, but it helps you improve your writing as well. And this has probably been like one of my most like powerful tools, to be quite honest. It runs on top of all your apps on your browser. So it'll check your emails to writing regular content to like anything basically. And it'll really, really help. So I encourage you all to use it, and probably even to just get the premium version of it, which is really not that much like in terms of a cost, but it'll definitely make a massive, massive difference. Another really cool thing is called the Hemingway app. So this basically helps you simplify your content and your writing to a level that like a third grader could understand what you're trying to say. And that's a key thing to understand, because social media and all these things move really fast, right? So if you're trying to explain a very complicated topic, like in the back of your mind, always think like, how would I explain it to like my like a grade school kid? But even if it's like the most advanced like engineering topic in the world, how do I explain it in such simple terms that someone will get it in like 3 seconds, basically? And tools like this can really help you understand and analyze your writing, where they'll give you like a score and say, like, this is at a grade 9 level or like whatever level, basically. Google Docs, everyone kind of knows about it, but very easy to collaborate with. So definitely encourage that. Canva is a free tool and also a paid tool that you can use to make all your design essentially. So you don't need to be a graphic designer. They have templates, they have like all kinds of things to use, but Canva and Grammarly probably I would say are your two most useful tools when you're creating content. You can make videos, you can do like social media posts, pretty much everything. And they have templates that are really well targeted for specific industries, specific use cases. So you kind of get everything out of it. And then publishing, this is sort of the best way to manage your time. So I use a thing called Social Pilot, but there's Hootsuite, there's probably like 10 other ones that I can name. But invest in some sort of scheduling tool that'll allow you to schedule your content in advance, essentially. So you don't have to sit there doing it every day. And that's probably the biggest sort of way to make this efficient and actually like useful, because if you are trying to do this every day, it literally becomes like a job and it's not going to work for you. Like it's very difficult. Yeah, go ahead.
Schedule it. It's gonna automatically like upload.
Correct. Yeah,
I don't have to do anything, just schedule the time and the.
exactly. Yeah. And you can also like a lot of these have AI built into it, so they can actually help you write social media posts and things like that as well. So it becomes like a pretty useful tool. They also give you like metrics and things like that, so you can see all of that. But yeah, the whole set it and forget it kind of idea is key. So like at my level, I'm actually putting out content almost like 3 months in advance. Like I kind of look at it as at a quarterly basis. So like for myself, I'll run like a 3 month campaign on whatever I kind of want to talk about. And everything's kind of scheduled almost a month to 3 months in advance as far as I can get. Because like I personally don't have time to do it. So if I don't do it that way, it's never gonna get done.
That's just like anything, okay, this holiday is coming.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can see that. And that's where, yeah, so the calendar that we were talking about before, you should be able to sort of like you can use the calendar tools that are built into some of these things to kind of like do the planning and then also do the content scheduling and all that together, essentially.
Sharing the deck to partner.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for sure. So this is AI, essentially the best tool that's probably been invented for content marketing now. So again, we were looking at sort of ChatGPT and other sort of generative like AI tools that are out there. They all kind of do similar things. I personally tend to use ChatGPT quite a bit, but you can do it with like, pretty much any AI tool that's out there. You can help it, you can use it to leverage to, create sort of anything from like your outlines for your content to actually generating content itself. And the way to kind of think about that is that when we initially talked about keywords and sort of planning initially how to strategize what content you're creating through keywords, you can take that list of keywords that you research and talk to say ChatGPT and say like, this is what my business does, this is sort of like the audience that I'm going after, and this is the goals that I have with this audience. And I found that these keywords are relevant to these audiences. Can you help me strategize and come up with 10 topics for blog posts that would be relevant to that audience with these keywords? And it'll give you a list that you can technically use, right? And then from there, taking it even further, you can then say, help me come up with an article based on this topic that you've now generated like a title for, essentially. And it'll give you a full like article that's like likely SEO optimized and like, is probably around the right sort of like length and things like that. And if it's not, you can kind of massage it to get there by either editing it yourself or just working it and refining it through different prompts with ChatGPT and things like that. So that's sort of how you can leverage AI to really like accelerate how much content you can create and not make it like overwhelming, essentially. Trying to write like, you know 10 to 20 different articles consistently all the time becomes pretty time consuming. But if you can leverage AI, then you can definitely do it. Now, when you're kind of getting to very niche, very specialized sort of like subjects, you have to be careful because obviously, like, if you're like, say, in the healthcare space or something like that, like I wouldn't 100% trust all the content that they're creating. So you have to be careful about making sure you review it and you're not 100% slowly relying on these sort of things. In other spaces, it works a little bit better. So I'll go back to the real estate example for again, like that's a little bit more of a straightforward industry where there's, not a high degree of like, extreme sort of like specializations on certain things or potentially like, some sort of like risk that's involved with sharing the wrong kind of information that's completely inaccurate. So it may work better for certain industries or certain subject matter as opposed to other things that maybe require a little bit more specialization or like, a little bit more expertise in some of those things. So just be careful, essentially. Like, don't do it blindly. Like, it's a tool that will definitely help you, but it's not going to solve your entire problem. It's going to replace a human being, essentially. Um, and this is where, you can kind of use it to kind of make yourself a little bit more efficient and kind of just turn things around a lot faster, essentially. And playing with the tone and the style and all those kind of things all just comes down to how you prompt it. So talk to it as if it was kind of like an individual. Someone like at one point, one of the best advice that I kind of got with working with these things is that when you start with like a fresh instance of like any sort of AI tool that you're going to use, you're kind of training it from like it almost being like a young child, right? So like feed it the right kind of information that you want it to understand so that it can help you with better content and better information as you ask for prompts and things like that. So usually when I start with like just one like instance of a chat GPT. And I like tell it as much as I can about like myself and like my company, my brand, all my goals, all these things before I even get into telling it to ask me to prompt anything. I'll even like upload the whole digital strategy that I've created and said, this is my strategy, like read it, understand it, and then help me with all these things. Once you kind of give it that framework and then like leave it to just doing that work for you, then like it can help you with these things. And that's where you can create multiple instances of, working with different sort of chats essentially within the whole application, right? So that's kind of there. And then, yeah, the rest is essentially just some key things that you can look at for engaging your audience. So just encourage interactions by asking questions or leveraging things like polls or all those kind of things. Make content compelling so people want to share it, want to like comment on it. When you're trying to offer something, try to include a call to action. So always trying to think like, how am I going to get them to convert? So that could be a question. It could be like an offer. It could be like a visit this link, whatever those things are, and respond back to your feedback. So if people are engaging with you, then try to like get back to them promptly, try to have a conversation in the comments, those kind of things. And that's what you can focus on if you've already sort of like planned everything in advance. You're not worrying about the content that goes out there. What you're more concerned about is just going through and maybe spending an hour every day, scan through all your social medias and your blog posts and things like that to see like, did someone like hit a like on this or, like leave me a little comment or something like that. And that's where you can put the day-to-day sort of energy essentially. And yeah, of course.
Drive traffic to related content.
Yeah. So related content could be content from, say, your colleagues or maybe like an industry body that's relevant to like your field. So you want to think of it as like a community, right? Like anything online is also like its own ecosystem. So say on LinkedIn, for example, if you're posting stuff on about yourself or about like things that you feel are important to your industry, like look at what other people are doing and engage with them or like, reshare their content if it makes sense with what your message is. And that way you kind of build more engagement and you also sort of build a sense of like being able to kind of like leverage the entire ecosystem. Like that person probably has their own followers and is doing the same thing that you're doing, but for themselves and their own angle. But if you can potentially like start having a conversation with each other or like cross promoting each other, then you're kind of like leveraging his audience or their audience and also your audience, right? So it kind of helps people go in both ways, but this is just a good way to kind of like just make connections online essentially. So digital networking is another way to kind of think of it in that sense. And then yeah, again, things we've kind of covered in the past, but just keep monitoring. So always pay attention to how you're doing. And what I typically do is I check in every month. So every month I'll put a date and just go through my analytics and go through all my tools. You don't need to spend tons of time on it. But it's good to understand what's going on, basically. Evaluate how things are going and change things if they're not working. So you can always find rooms for adjustment, essentially. So don't kind of think of it as a set it and forget it completely. You want to plan, you want to schedule, and then you want to make adjustments as you can. And the farther out that you can start thinking, the better you'll be in terms of being able to make adjustments in the moment. Because if you're trying to do all this in the same moment or in this or like in the same time frame, it's not going to really make sense at all, right? If you have already planned all this stuff, then it makes sense. So the key is really to plan as much as you can, and then just keep improving as much as you can. So just keep it's a bit of a journey, and just try to spend as much time as you can to sort of improve as much as possible. Look for advice, look for what other people are doing, and test things, and like try to like find inspiration in what's working for other people as well. You're not copying, like you're adding your own sort of take on it. So it's okay to look at other people and see what's working for them or what they're having success with, because you're not going to do it exactly the same way they are.